What is up, fellow nerds, and welcome back to the Dapper Snapper Gaming channel, and welcome back to How Do I Want to Do This? This is our series where we take a look at all playable options available to players in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and we rank them on a scale of 1 to 10, and either build them or fix them depending on how they rank. Now today we begin our final subclass talks for the Sorcerer class. It's a bittersweet moment, of course, and it always is when you finish one class and move on to the other, but it's time, and I think that it is going to be a lot of fun as we talk about some homebrew today. Technically, I mean, basically anything that's done by Matt Mercer is kind of in a weird limbo state where most tables are going to allow it, and then you've got some that may not, but it might as well be official, so that's why we're covering it today. And so we're finishing off with the Runechild. If you're excited to talk some homebrew and some really cool stuff that maybe you weren't so much aware of, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, make sure to share the video with your friends, and of course click the bell so you're notified when new videos are uploaded. So what is a Runechild sorcerer, right? This is kind of a weird territory to go into, right? So we have, of course, like Rune Knight fighters, which we've talked about before. I'll throw that up in the iCard above, which inscribe runes onto things, right? However, as a sorcerer that is a Runechild, you have runes on you, and they provide different powers as you gain levels as you go on. It actually ends up creating a limited resource similar to sorcery points, but they're tied to sorcery points in how they are used or converted, which is really interesting in how those interact. But we're just gonna have to see how strong this homebrew ends up being today. We know that there's some crazy stuff that Matt has made in the past, and there's some crazy stuff that we're gonna be covering in the future, especially when it comes to his wizards. But is this as good or better than something like Aberrant Mind, or is it something that's kind of trash? We're just gonna have to find that out today. Starting off at level 1, we get Essence Runes, and this is essentially just kind of setting up the rest of the subclass. There are a couple of things about it, and it'll kind of get a ranking, but the ranking here is honestly not too important, so don't put too much stock into this. But basically, this gives us how the rules of the runes on our body work. So we basically start with one rune, and we keep a rune equal to whatever level we are in the class. Same thing as what our sorcery points would be, and those can look however we want them to. Those can be anywhere. At the end of a turn, whenever you do spend sorcery points, a number of the runes that you have will go basically from dormant to charged. Now you'll always have a number total equal to your sorcerer level, and that's regardless of whether or not you take something like Metamagic Adept. Your total number is not going to improve just because you took that feat. Just something to be aware of there. But you could use some and then get those extras back if you wanted to, so that could work. Also, as a bonus action, we can just convert them if we want to, and take one sorcery point to take 2 essence runes and go from basically dormant to charged. We will shed bright light around us in a 5-foot radius and dim light for an additional 5 feet if we have 5 or more that are charged at a time. And whenever we expend a charged rune, of course, it will revert back to its normal state, and any of them that are charged when we take a long rest will no longer be when that is complete. So this is just kind of setting up the rest of the subclass. There's not really a whole lot to rank about this, so I'm not going to give this a ranking. It's going to get just a nothing out of 10. There's nothing good or bad about this. This just kind of sets up how this feature is going to work. They technically could have probably put this in with the Glyphs of Aegis feature, which we'll talk about in a minute, but yeah. So what does this do? We have a number of these equal to our sorcerer level. And so again, if we have extra sorcery points, that does not give us extra runes. So just because you get extra from Metamagic Adept does not give you extra runes. It's just equal to your level. And so we can then charge these by either using sorcery points, or we can get them by converting one sorcery point to charge 2 of them up, which is cool. The thing is, you don't necessarily get a bad end of the deal either way here, right? Because either you've used the sorcery point to do something, right, once you get to level 2 or 3. Now, one interesting thing is that this technically isn't going to do anything, at least interacting with spending our sorcery points in the way that we typically would on metamagic options until level 3. So we're getting a feature that isn't really going to come into itself until we get to level 3. That's one thing to think about there, but either way, just something to think about here. But it's really interesting how this works, because either you're going to spend the sorcery point to get something useful, so maybe you quickened, or maybe you subtle spelled, or you twinned, or whatever it happens to be, and then you still get this charging up another feature. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch in that regard. Or you get a 2-for-1. Whereas if you used it up, you got the benefit of the meta magic option plus a charged rune, or you can just spend 1 and get 2 charged runes. So there's good and bad to both, and there are definitely reasons to do either way. The cost ratio is honestly fine. I have no issues with this, but again, there's not going to be a ranking on this. I don't think it makes any sense to rank this, because this doesn't really do anything. It just kind of sets up where we're going for later. So let's go ahead and jump to the next thing. So next up we get Runic Magic, which is our first actual feature, and this functions basically like the expanded spell lists that came with things like the Aberrant Mind and the Clockwork Soul. This means that obviously there is a pretty good tendency that this is going to be a pretty good subclass by having this, because this is a huge buff that many of the other subclasses do not have. But is it enough? Let's see what it packs. So with this, of course, it's going to give us an expanded spell list. We're going to get access to a bunch of extra spells here, which is great. And of course, these are going to come online at the respective sorcerer levels that are listed on your screen right now. They count as sorcerer spells, but again, they don't count towards the number we know. And here's the kicker. Of course, when we gain a level in the class, we can replace one spell that we gained with another spell of the same level, and it has to be an abjuration or transmutation spell from the sorcerer, warlock, or wizard spell list. And then of course you have your list down below. So here's the thing, that list is really not that bad. Longstrider is not too bad. Lesser Restoration is an okay support feature. Glyph of Warding makes a lot of sense. It's an okay spell. Magic Circle makes a lot of sense. It's not a great spell. Death Ward, okay. Freedom of Movement, I like. Greater Restoration, okay. Telekinesis, okay. None of these are insane. None of them are necessarily bad, but like it's kind of middling, right? Having the feature itself is really nice. We get access to all these extra spells, and you have to consider, we could just swap out like Protection from Evil and Good for Shield. Right, that falls under the abjuration list. So there are definitely tons of ways that we can make this better. There are plenty of great defensive spells with abjuration, and transmutation has some pretty awesome stuff as well. So really, I think that we are going to be relying a lot more on the other spells that we could be getting, rather than necessarily just the ones that are on this list. And that does have to be considered when we're talking about ranking something, because let's be real, we're going to be replacing a lot of these, but there are plenty of options on those 2 spell lists. So to me, this is going to get a solid 9 out of 10. I think this is really, really good. There's a lot of good that can come out of this. Again, I would drop things like Magic Circle. I would drop things like Protection from Evil and Good and Protection from Poison. There are plenty of these that I would drop, but then you can have Shield, and that saves you a slot from whatever else you wanted to take on the normal sorcerer list. Or you can take something from Warlock or Wizard that you normally wouldn't get access to, which is really, really good as well. The flexibility here is amazing. The spell lists that you're able to choose from are really not bad at all, and honestly, I'm really starting to like this so far. Our third feature at level 1, that's right, we get 3 features, although the first one was kind of a non-feature, it just kind of sets up the rest of everything. But either way, Glyphs of Aegis here is going to give us kind of something to use our runes on, which is really, really cool. So with this, we can now release stored power that is within our runes to either absorb or deflect attacks, which is pretty interesting. Whenever we take damage, we can expend any number of charged runes as a reaction. We can roll a number of d6s equal to the number of runes that we expended and reduce the damage by whatever it is that we rolled. When we reach 6th level, we can touch a creature as an action and expend up to 3 charged runes to give this feature to somebody else for an hour. The next time that creature takes damage, it is going to roll 1d6 per what we gave it, and of course reduce the damage by the total. You cannot do this to the same creature more than once at a time, and of course the die is going to improve to a d8 at level 14. This is pretty cool. Again, we can't use this right now because we don't have sorcery points until level 2. So hang in there at level 1, which nobody's powerful at level 1, but essentially you have nothing at level 1 except something crazy on your forehead. But once you hit level 2, you can then convert these over and use them at that way. And then once you hit level 3, of course, you'll be able to get them converted over when you actually spend them on meta magic options. So there are plenty of ways to make this work, but just at level 1, there's nothing you can really do about this at the moment unless you took Meta Magic Adept as a variant human or custom lineage. So, whatever. But as far as this feature goes, we can now reduce damage, which is honestly really good. As a sorcerer, we really are going to be squishy, and this just is essentially giving us free health for the whole day. And then later on we can transfer this to other people and help our squishy friends if we need to. But this is going to basically add to our HP total by however much we can roll on however many D6s we have going on at the time, which is really, really cool. It is a reaction. So you can say, okay, I took 15 damage and I want to roll 4 D6s. I can spend 4 of these because I'm level 4 or 5, whatever it happens to be, and possibly reduce all of the damage depending on how well you roll. So there's a lot of thinking here. There's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with this, and honestly I like this as a defensive feature. It's similar to Shield, except it's a little more customizable, and of course doesn't take a spell slot, which is really the more important thing. I guess it's more similar to like Absorb Elements, but it's not limited to certain types of damage, which is good. Either way, I think this is pretty solid as a feature overall. I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I think it's good, right? We can only go up to 3 charged runes on allies, which I think is kind of the tough thing, right? And obviously this can get very expensive because there's no cap on how many that you can spend on yourself. So if you take a really big hit, you could spend all of your sorcery points in one go if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. So definitely something to think about it, and you're gonna have to really think hard before spending a ton of sorcery points on this because you don't want anything to go too crazy. But either way, it's not a bad feature. I like it. When we reach level 6, we get 2 features, which is cool. We had 3 starting out, kind of, and then now we have 2, which is really cool. So we start off with Sigillic Augmentation, which is a really cool name. Let's hope it does cool things as well. So with this, we can now bolster our physical capabilities using our runes. Whenever we make a strength, dexterity, or constitution check, we can expend a charged rune to give advantage on that roll. Additionally, whenever we are forced to make a strength, dexterity, or constitution saving throw, we can use our reaction to expend 1 rune and gain advantage on that saving throw. Once you use this feature in this way, you can only do it again after a long rest. This is interesting, and it was almost really good until they threw that little caveat there at the very end. So being able to use this on a strength, dexterity, or constitution ability check isn't going to be nearly as important, honestly. I'm not so worried about me making my, I don't know, acrobatics check, right? Outside of escaping a grapple, I don't see this being the most useful thing because we are not really focused on this kind of thing. Where this would have come into play a ton is constitution saving throws, and it does help with that, right? However, we can only do this once per long rest. The biggest thing here is, of course, constitution saving throws, and we only get to do it once per day for the saving throws, which is super unfortunate. I really wish that this was just until you ran out, because again, you're expending a rune here. It's not like there's no cost already. So to me, I would say if you want to spend the runes, spend the runes. I don't know why there would be a restriction here. So that unfortunately is going to take points off for me because I'm not so much worried about the strength or dexterity or constitution ability checks. And the saving throws are really where that's at, and we're limited to once per day. So that kind of sucks in that way. So unfortunately, because of that restriction, I've got to bring this back to a 7 out of 10. Only getting advantage on 1 per day is really, really tough, and that really, really holds this back. Also at level 6, we get Manifest Inscriptions, and this just makes us better at reading certain magical things. So as an action, we can expend one of our runes to reveal hidden or invisible arcane traps, marks, runes, wards, sensors, or glyphs within 60 feet of us, and those are going to glow for 1 minute. We also now have advantage on Arcana checks to discern the nature of any magic that is revealed by doing this. If those glyphs happen to be in a language that we normally would not be able to read, we actually can understand them and read them in a language that we know. This is cool. It's more of a ribbon feature, but it makes a lot of sense to be able to do something like this. You are the rune master, or at least you're working to be that. And so for you to be able to read runes and be able to see these things, to me it's kind of like Divine Sense on the Paladin kit, but for runes, which in the right campaign definitely could be great. In other campaigns, this will never come up. So it just, again, it depends on your campaign. Like I say, with anything that's niche like this, talk to your DM prior to taking something like this, so that you know, okay, I will have use in my features. I'm not just going to be walking around and just any other sorcerer, and I don't get to use my fun ribbon features in this way. So this really depends on your campaign, and generally the rule on that is going to be give this a 7 out of 10. It could be a lot better in the right campaign. It could be a lot worse in the wrong campaign. So 7 is kind of the middle ground here. At level 14, we get Runic Torrent, and this is where things start to get exciting. So with this, whenever we cast a spell, we can expend 2 charged runes to cause the spell to deal force damage instead of whatever damage type it would have dealt normally. Additionally, all creatures that are targeted by that spell or within the spell's area must succeed on a strength saving throw against our spell save DC, or be knocked prone or pushed 15 feet away from the spell's point of origin, and we get to choose. Once we use this, we cannot do so again until we finish a rest. This is a pretty cool feature because dealing force damage is very, very rare in Dungeons & Dragons, especially for sorcerers. There's not a whole lot out here unless you dip into Warlock in order to grab Eldritch Blast. There's not a whole lot you can do, and force is the least resisted damage type in the entire game. So this means that you're going to be successful in dealing decent amounts of damage no matter what creature you hit with whatever spell it is that you choose. This could be Force Ball, and that's very, very helpful to deal damage to a lot of different creatures, possibly knock them prone, so then your barbarian or your fighter or whoever can then go in and pick off all of these enemies that are now laying on the ground that failed that strength save. There's a lot of good that can come with this. Or if you all are just trying to get away from a group of whoever's, then you can blow back a bunch of them 15 feet, and then now you all are that much further ahead. There's a lot of situations where this can come up. It does suck that it is limited to once per rest, but honestly, something like this, it makes sense that it is restricted in this way, and I think that we can make some really good use out of it because of that. So to me, this is going to be an 8 out of 10. I think it's good. Force damage is great, and it's going to be very successful in getting around resistance on like 99% of creatures, which is fantastic. Then the additional effect added onto that makes it even better because this can be combined with a bunch of different spells, and so you can create some pretty nasty combos here, and I think that is really the true draw of this. You could even, if you wanted to, take a spell that is ranged and cast it on whoever, knock them prone, have that quickened, and then walk up and cast a melee spell now that the person is prone, and you get advantage. So there are ways to do this. There are ways to make this work, and so as long as you're smart about this, I think that we can make this into a really fun combo that deals a lot of damage. Finally, at level 18, we get Arcane Exemplar, and this is where all of the rune powers finally come together in harmony to make us the ultimate Runechild. And this one is pretty cool. So with this, as a bonus action, we can expend 1 charged rune to become a being of pure magical energy. And while we are in this state, we have a flying speed of 60 feet, creatures have disadvantage on saving throws against our sorcerer spells, we have resistance to damage from spells, and whenever we cast a spell of 1st level or higher, we regain hit points equal to that spell's level. That sounds pretty great, right? When you're waiting for it to say, oh, it lasts a minute, or it lasts until the end of your turn. However, you can expend a charged rune at the end of your turn for no action to extend the duration until the end of your next turn. And then when your form ends, you are stunned until the end of your next turn. Once you use this feature once, you cannot do it again until you finish a long rest. This is a feature that is really hard to rank because there's a lot of good and then they really reel it back towards the end, right? Having a flying speed of 60 feet is incredible. Giving disadvantage to your sorcerer spells is incredible, which is amazing. This doesn't say necessarily whether this affects the saving throw on your runic torrent that you got back at level 14. Let me know down in the comments below if you think that it does or does not apply to that feature, because it's unclear as to whether or not it does. Then you also have resistance to damage done by spells, which is pretty huge. And whenever you cast a 1st level spell, you get some health back, which is really, really good. Again, going with the defensive features that we had earlier, we now can deflect damage and we can now regain health, although it is very small amounts that we are able to do that. Here's the thing, this feature is pretty cool. I do think this feature is pretty cool. However, I do think that the restrictions on it make it really, really tough. First of all, if you use this and forget to extend it, it's gone. You get to use it 1 time per day. That's it, right? I really wish on this feature that they would have said, okay, you get to go for, 5 rounds total. And once you've done 5 turns worth, you're done for the day. I feel like they could have done something like that and this would have been better, so that you could have done 1 or 2 turns here, 1 or 2 turns there at the same time. But you can't do that. So once you drop it, you're done for the whole day and then you're stunned. So you have to be really careful about when you end this as well, because stunned is really bad. And so you need to make sure that you are not getting hit during that turn or you are in for a really, really bad time. This also is going to get expensive, right? It's going to cost 1 per turn, and that doesn't count any of the other stuff that you're doing. That doesn't count any of the deflecting. That doesn't count any of the runic torrent that is giving you force damage. That doesn't count any of that stuff. So your runes are going to be going very quickly. And here's the thing, you've got to be spending your sorcery points in order to get enough of these to work out. So you're going to have to be running yourself out of sorcery points very, very quickly in order to make sure that you can maintain this, because if you run out of runes, you're done. And that's the tough part about this, is that you running out of runes is possibly going to kill you. If you are in the air and you lose your flying speed, you fall and take fall damage, and you're stunned and you're prone. And you're not going to have a good day if that happens. So this is a feature that is very much a double-edged sword, and you are going to have to be super careful and make sure that you are spending those sorcery points. Again, using up a resource really quickly, even if you don't want to, you're going to have to in order to maintain this feature, which means that it's going to force you into a position sometimes that you may not want to be in. And that makes this a little bit tough. Overall, it's good, but there are a lot of restrictions on it that really hurt it, especially at 18th level. I would have thought that a lot of these would not have been here. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. I could see the argument for an 8, but ultimately I think the restrictions just hold it back way too much, and it's just kind of a difficult way in which it interacts with the core class. So what do we think of the Runechild Sorcerer? This is one of the most unique sorcerers that's out there, honestly. Having an expendable resource that comes from you using an expendable resource is very cool. And you don't really see that in D&D at all. You don't see something that is, if I spend a core feature, then I get a new feature that can be used now afterwards. It creates an interesting dynamic where you're forced to use your sorcery points, which you were going to use anyway, but you might use them faster than what you originally wanted to, because you want to make sure that you have your runes online instead of slowly letting them trickle throughout the day. That is where I see this having the most issues, is that I think that this is going to force you out of sorcery points faster than what you normally would as a sorcerer. Is that a bad thing? Not on short adventuring days, but on long ones, I could see that being a bit of an issue where you don't have time to rest and get that back. You don't have time to do anything like that, and you're just stuck with no sorcery points. And a sorcerer without any sorcery points is not good. You of course can convert spell slots over, but again, that's your spell slots, which also is not always going to be the best as far as math wise. So this puts you in an interesting pickle, and you're going to have to be incredibly strategic about when you convert things over, how many things you're using, how many runes you have active at a time, keeping track of your damage. To me, this seems like one of the most complicated sorcerers in order to keep track of all of your resources. So I would not recommend this sorcerer to a beginner. I think that this is really only going to be targeting towards your people who have played before, and really who have played a sorcerer before. I wouldn't even say just somebody who's played a spellcaster, because I think that this could get really frustrating if you're not careful with it. So just be really mindful of that. All of that negative to say that this has an expanded spell list, and darn it if that doesn't give this thing so many bonus points. That is just incredible as far as that goes, and then everything else is kind of gravy. So here's the thing, I cannot give this a 10 out of 10. I just can't, because ultimately it is forcing you out of a resource that you normally are going to need, or at the very least it is making you choose a lot more than what you normally would, and there's going to be a lot of juggling of limited resources. And to me, that is in a small way an active takeaway. So I cannot give this a perfect score. However, that expanded spell list goes hard. It really helps. So I've got to give this a low 9. I think that this is kind of the lowest of the 9s, but I still think that it deserves a 9 because of that expanded spell list and because of the other things that are around this. I think if you're a player that is really in the know on how sorcerers work, and you're really good at resource management and that kind of thing, you're going to make something that is busted strong, and this thing is going to be insane. If you are a new player, I think you might get frustrated because you don't have any of your features off the bat. You have to spend other things first, and that might be a little frustrating, and that may cause a little bit of frustration, and I see that. I think that could end up being a problem, and so I just want to warn you before you take this. But still, if you're an experienced player, I think there's a ton of fun to be had, and I think you can make something really strong. So what do you think of my ranking? I think that my ranking is going to be a little controversial. I don't think that everyone's going to agree, but you know what? That's fine, and that's what the comment section is for. So let me know down below what you thought. Later this week, we're going to be doing our final Sorcerer build before we move on to Warlock. Like always, I'll be taking a week off between each of the classes. I'm also working on my house a little bit as well, so I need that time in order to focus on that. But we'll take a week off from doing Dungeons and Dragons, and then we will be back. Pokemon videos are not going to stop. This week goes up the week 6 battle for the UNPL Spring Fling. Next week is week 7, and then the season is done. And if I made playoffs, then playoffs will continue from there. If I did not, then that's where the series will end for that season as we prepare for season 5 of Maine. Until next time, stay safe out there, stay healthy. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.